If you thought Marvel was going to keep the X-Men mystery alive for much longer, think again, because the mutants have officially arrived. Marvel Studios used the Disney Entertainment Showcase at D23 on August 14, 2026, to finally reveal the principal cast of its highly anticipated X-Men movie, and the lineup is already giving fans a lot to talk about. Even more importantly, Marvel confirmed that the film will hit theaters on May 5, 2028. And before we break down every casting choice and what it could mean for the MCU, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because we're going to be following every major Marvel development as this new mutant era takes shape. So here's the official lineup. Sadie Sink is Jean Grey, Kit Connor is Cyclops, Christopher Abbott is Professor Charles Xavier, Samara Weaving is Emma Frost, and Navarrette is Rogue, Maya Boyd is Storm, and Adam Driver is Nathaniel Milbury, better known as Mr. Sinister. The announcement came with images pairing the actors with classic X-Men comic artwork, making it very clear that Marvel wants audiences to immediately connect these new performers with some of the most recognizable mutants in comic book history. And honestly, this is one of those Marvel casting announcements where the individual choices may be just as interesting as the movie itself. Let's start with Sadie Sink as Jean Grey. This one is particularly important because Sink is not completely new to the MCU anymore. She has already been introduced as Jean Grey in Spider-Man. Brand New Day, meaning Marvel has effectively been planting the seed for this character before unveiling the full X-Men team. Sink also previously spoke positively about Marvel's decision to introduce a younger generation of mutants, and she has indicated that filming on the X-Men movie is expected to begin in 2027. And I think this is a smart move. Jean Grey is one of the most complicated characters in X-Men history. She can be compassionate, powerful, vulnerable, and, eventually, terrifying. The biggest challenge isn't simply finding an actress who looks like Jean. Marvel needs someone capable of carrying the emotional weight of the character. Sadie Sink has already demonstrated that kind of intensity. That makes her casting particularly interesting, because Marvel isn't introducing Jean as a completely unknown character to audiences anymore. The studio appears to be positioning her as one of the central pieces of its mutant future. Then we have Kit Connor as Scott Summers, better known as Cyclops. And this might be one of the most important castings in the entire announcement. Cyclops has historically been one of the defining leaders of the X-Men, but previous live-action movies sometimes struggled to give Scott the same importance that he has in the comics. Marvel now has the opportunity to completely reset that perception. Connor is also coming to the role with a rapidly growing profile, which makes him an intriguing choice for a character who could potentially remain important for years. And here's my opinion. If Marvel really wants the X-Men to become its next major superhero franchise, Cyclops cannot simply be the guy who shoots lasers from his eyes. He needs to be the leader. He needs the internal conflict. He needs the responsibility of trying to protect mutants while dealing with a world that may fear them. And that is where this new version of Scott Summers could become extremely interesting. Next is Christopher Abbott as Professor Charles Xavier. This is another casting choice that immediately caught my attention. Professor X is not simply the mentor of the X-Men. He represents the ideological foundation of the team. His dream of peaceful coexistence between humans and mutants is essentially one of the franchise's defining concepts. Abbott is an interesting choice because Marvel isn't simply repeating the Patrick Stewart version of Xavier. This gives the studio an opportunity to create a different interpretation of the character rather than asking another actor to imitate what Stewart already did. And that distinction is extremely important. Marvel doesn't need to recreate the Fox X-Men movies. It needs to build its own X-Men universe. Then comes one of the biggest surprises. Samara Weaving as Emma Frost. Emma Frost is fascinating because she isn't traditionally the straightforward hero that some of the other characters are. She is intelligent, manipulative, powerful, and morally complicated. Her inclusion also raises some serious questions about what kind of X-Men story Marvel is planning. Because if you're putting Professor X, Jean Grey, Cyclops, Emma Frost, and Mr. Sinister into the same movie, you're potentially dealing with something much more complicated than a simple superhero versus supervillain story. Emma has deep connections to the Hellfire Club in the comics, and her presence could allow Marvel to explore the political and social divisions within mutant society itself. That is exactly the kind of storytelling I think the MCU's X-Men need. Not just another giant CGI battle. Give us ideological conflict. Give us mutant politics. Give us characters who don't necessarily agree on what mutants should become. That is where the X-Men have always been different from many other superhero franchises. Then there's Inde Navarrette as Rogue. This is probably one of the casting announcements that will generate the most discussion because Rogue is such an iconic character, particularly for fans who grew up with the 1990s animated series. But Marvel appears to be taking a fresh approach with the character. Navarrette is a rising performer, and casting her as Rogue represents another indication that Marvel is putting younger and less established actors at the center of this franchise. And personally, I like that strategy. Marvel doesn't need 7 massive Hollywood stars competing for attention. It needs actors who can grow with these characters. Because if this movie works, these performers could potentially be playing these roles for the next decade. Then we have Maya Boyd as Aurora Monroe, better known as Storm. This is another casting that could become extremely important. Storm isn't just one of the strongest mutants. She is one of the most important leaders in X-Men history, and eventually becomes a major figure within the team. But once again, the big question is not whether Maya Boyd can look like Storm. The question is whether Marvel will actually give Storm the importance she deserves. Because let's be honest, Storm has enormous potential. Her weather manipulation gives Marvel the visual spectacle audiences expect. But the character's real strength comes from her leadership, intelligence, and emotional complexity. If Marvel gets that balance right, Storm could become one of the breakout stars of this new franchise. And then, Adam Driver as Mr. Sinister. This is where things get really interesting. Driver will play Nathaniel Milbury, an alias associated with the character better known as Mr. Sinister, a major X-Men villain. Marvel's official announcement and reports from the D23 reveal established Driver as part of the film's principal cast. And I have to say, Adam Driver as Mr. Sinister is one of those castings that immediately makes you wonder what Marvel is planning. Driver has the acting range to make this character genuinely unsettling. Mr. Sinister isn't simply a villain who wants to destroy the heroes. He is obsessed with genetics, mutation, and manipulating mutant evolution. That makes him almost perfectly suited to the X-Men mythology, because his goals are directly connected to the very existence of mutants. And here's where my theory begins. I don't necessarily think Marvel will make Mr. Sinister the traditional big bad, who walks into the final battle and gets defeated in the third act. I think Marvel could be much more strategic with him. He could operate from the shadows. He could manipulate events. He could influence characters. He could potentially be connected to the origins of some of the mutants. And if Marvel is thinking long-term, Mr. Sinister could become a villain who develops across multiple movies rather than being completely used up in one film. Now, there's another important detail that shouldn't get lost in all the excitement. Mystique and Beast were not among the characters officially announced in this principal cast reveal. That does not necessarily mean they won't appear. It simply means Marvel has not officially announced actors for those roles in this reveal. And honestly, I think leaving some major characters uncast is probably intentional. Marvel knows exactly what happens when fans know every detail years before a movie comes out. The mystery disappears. Right now, we know enough to get excited, but there are still enormous questions surrounding the story. Who is Magneto? Who is Beast? Who is Mystique? Will Wolverine appear? What role will the Avengers play? And perhaps the biggest question of all, how exactly will these X-Men fit into the post? Secret Wars *MCU. ***. That question is especially important because the X-Men aren't arriving in isolation. Marvel's next major phase is already moving toward enormous crossover territory. Avengers. Doomsday is scheduled for December 18th, 2026, and the movie is expected to bring together characters and worlds from across Marvel cinematic history, including the Avengers, Fantastic Four, and X-Men. Avengers. Secret Wars is then positioned as another major event in 2027. That means the May 2028 X-Men movie could arrive at a fascinating moment. If Secret Wars fundamentally reshapes the MCU, the X-Men could be one of the biggest beneficiaries. And that is why I don't think Marvel is simply making another X-Men reboot. This could be Marvel's opportunity to make the mutants one of the central pillars of the MCU. Think about the timing. The original X-Men movie arrived in 2000 and helped establish the modern superhero movie era. More than 2 decades later, Marvel Studios now has complete control of the franchise and can finally integrate the X-Men directly into the same cinematic universe as Spider-Man, the Avengers, and the Fantastic Four. That is an enormous opportunity, but it also comes with enormous pressure, because fans have already seen Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. They've seen Patrick Stewart's Professor X. They've seen Ian McKellen's Magneto. They've seen James McAvoy's Xavier. They've seen Michael Fassbender's Magneto. They've seen multiple versions of Jean Grey, Storm, Cyclops, and Rogue. So Marvel has to answer one simple question. Why do we need another X-Men universe? My answer is, because Marvel finally has a chance to do it properly within the MCU, but only if it understands what makes the X-Men special. The X-Men were never just about superpowers. They were about identity. They were about fear. They were about discrimination. They were about people being born different and trying to find their place in a world that doesn't necessarily accept them. That is why the franchise has remained relevant for decades. And if Marvel turns the X-Men into nothing more than another superhero team fighting another CGI army, I think it will be a huge missed opportunity. But if Marvel builds a story around characters, ideology, and the complicated relationship between humans and mutants, then this could be massive. And personally, I think the casting gives me more confidence than I expected. Sadie Sink gives Marvel a young Jean Grey with enormous dramatic potential. Kit Connor could finally give Cyclops the leadership role he deserves. Christopher Abbott gets a chance to redefine Professor X. Samara Weaving could make Emma Frost one of the MCU's most complicated characters. Navarrette gives Rogue a completely fresh beginning. Maya Boyd has the opportunity to establish a new Storm for an entire generation. And Adam Driver as Mr. Sinister? That might be the wild card that makes this whole thing even more intriguing. The official X-Men movie is now set for May 5th, 2028, and Marvel has finally shown us who will carry this new era of mutants. Now the waiting game begins, because the cast is no longer the mystery. The story is, and honestly, that might be the more exciting mystery of all. Who will play Magneto? Will Wolverine appear? Who becomes Beast and Mystique? And will this new X-Men team become the next Avengers-level franchise for Marvel? Let me know what you think in the comments. Who is your favorite casting choice so far? Sadie Sink as Jean Grey, Kit Connor as Cyclops, Adam Driver as Mr. Sinister, or someone else? And if you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe to the channel, because as Marvel starts revealing more about its mutant future, we are going to be here to break down every major announcement.